Today, we are really putting the machines to the test.
We absolutely are. We're diving into the world of DARPA, looking at this incredible research that's being driven by these really high-stakes robotics
It's a
competitions.
fantastic stack of material.
It is. We're going to be looking at how these challenges are pushing the absolute limits of autonomy, of human-robot interaction, and really the future of rescue technology.
And it's such an incredible story of innovation under pressure. I mean, a lot of us remember those early viral videos of robots just stumbling around.
Oh yeah, falling over.
Exactly. But the source material you've got today makes it so clear that these are not just novelty races. The DARPA challenges are these essential high-velocity mechanisms. They're designed to force solutions to extremely complex real-world problems.
And the motivation is, it's pretty sobering, actually.
It is. It stems directly from disasters like the 2011 Fukushima Daiichi nuclear catastrophe. You had human workers facing just excessive amounts of radiation trying to stabilize those reactors.
So the whole point of these competitions is to build a machine that can go where a person can't, to bridge that gap.
That is the entire purpose, to build resilient machines that can operate in those gaps.
Absolutely. So our mission here for this deep dive is to get past the flash and the spectacle of it all and really understand the core technological breakthroughs. What does it actually take for a machine to operate effectively in a place that's unknown, that's chaotic, often completely hostile?
And we have a really robust stack here.
We do. It covers everything from, the fundamental engineering of just getting a bipedal humanoid to walk without falling over,
Which is incredibly hard.
all the way to these complex mapping algorithms that let a whole team of robots navigate and map a collapsed dark tunnel network. We're going to connect the big strategic wins to the sort of invisible mathematical foundations underneath it all.
It's a study in extremes, really. You have this government-sponsored ingenuity spurred on by huge prize money and very specific, often dire operational needs.
And it's all aimed at tackling the toughest frontiers in autonomy.
Exactly. We're looking at the synthesis of mobility, perception, and, I think critically, how humans learn to trust and guide these machines when the stakes are just about as high as they can get.
Okay, let's unpack this.
So where do we start? The DRC seems like the obvious place.
I think so. We have to begin with the contest that really captured everyone's attention and sort of defined this current era of disaster robotics. The DARPA Robotics Challenge, the DRC.
Right. And this competition was fundamentally about creating a machine, a humanoid, that could essentially mimic a human worker.
But in places built for humans, right, like power plants, chemical facilities, not out in the wild.
That's the key distinction. Environments engineered for human use. And the DRC's foundational goals were, just incredibly ambitious because they forced a total systems approach.
It wasn't just about one thing.
No, not at all. They demanded the seamless integration of 4 key domains into a functional human-robot team that was performing a simulated disaster mission.
Okay, so what were those 4 domains?
First was mobility, just moving. Second, complex manipulation, so using tools, turning valves, that kind of thing.
The hands-on stuff.
Exactly. Third was advanced perception, seeing and actually understanding the chaotic world around it. And fourth was the design of the operator interface.
Yeah. How the person drives the thing.
And if you failed in any one of those domains, the whole mission failed. It didn't matter how good you were at the other 3.
And one of the most visible examples of a strategic approach to this whole challenge was the team that used the Boston Dynamics robot, the famous Atlas Unplugged.
Right. There's a fascinating paper in your stack that details their methodology. And what jumps out immediately and what you highlighted is their total focus on reliability and survivability. It wasn't about speed.
No, it was a very deliberate safety-first strategy.
It was. And the sources make it abundantly clear that this sort of philosophical choice was the core reason for their remarkable consistency. They were operating under a very simple understanding.
Which was?
In a real disaster zone, any failure that requires a human to intervene, losing communication, or worse, the robot tripping and falling.
Yeah.
That is a catastrophic setback.
Because the mission clock is ticking.
The mission timeline is compromised.
Okay.
You might have to risk a human life just to go in and reset the system. So they were optimizing for maximum time on task without needing one of those resets.
Let's really break that strategy down because it feels like it contains lessons that go way beyond just robotics. It's about managing any complex, high-risk system.
I agree.
So first, they prioritized extensive operator practice, and we're not talking about like a quick tutorial here.
No, this was deep, intensive training. They recognized that operating a multi-limb robot in a dynamic environment, it requires highly trained humans who understand that specific robot's failure modes and its capabilities inside and out.
And that practice was reinforced with technology, right? They didn't just rely on the human skill.
That's right. They introduced explicit monitoring systems. These were designed to detect robot errors before they became terminal.
So like an early warning system.
Think of it like that. Internal system diagnostics that are constantly running, looking for subtle signs of instability or maybe unusual sensor readings that come just before a loss of balance or an impact.
That's way more valuable than just reading an error log after the robot's already on the ground.
Infinitely more valuable. And to get better data for those systems, they often added more sensing capabilities, things beyond what the base Atlas robot had.
Like what?
Things like high-resolution depth cameras or specialized contact sensors in the feet. Anything to make sure they had the best possible representation of this messy, unpredictable world around them.
And all of this information, all this data funnels into this crucial element we touched on, the operator interfaces and these varying degrees of abstraction. This feels like the heart of the safety-first design.
It absolutely is. The source material talks about how they enabled the remote human operator to monitor and control the robot at different bandwidths, is a good way to put it.
Explain that. What does abstraction mean here?
Abstraction just means the level of detail the human has to worry about. So at the highest level of abstraction, the operator might issue a very general command, something like, walk to that door and use the handle.
And the robot just figures it out.
The robot's internal autonomy system takes care of the hundreds of tiny steps required.
Yeah.
Balance, foot placement, arm trajectory, all of it. But
Here's the key part.
this is the key. The moment the operator notices the robot wobbling, even slightly, or the monitoring system flags a potential misstep on some uneven rubble, or maybe the communications just get a little spotty.
The human has to be able to take over instantly.
The operator needs to drop down to a very low level of control.
So what does that look like mechanically? If the robot is autonomously trying to step on a piece of rubble and the operator sees, nope, that's a bad spot, how does the human actually bypass that autonomous decision?
That is where this concept of runtime modifiable behavior control comes in. It's a key technical requirement for any system like this. The system isn't running some monolithic, uninterruptible block of code that just says walk.
It's more dynamic.
It's a control loop that is constantly checking for external inputs. The low-level control interface, the human with a joystick or giving specific joint angle commands, it's designed to instantaneously override whatever the autonomy system wants to do.
So the high-level plan just pauses.
It immediately pauses, and the robot's actuators take direct human-issued commands to stabilize or to reposition. And then the moment the human lets go of that low-level override, the system has to be able to safely transition back to a high-level task or just enter a neutral, stable pose.
That robust, rapid transition is what prevents the catastrophic failure.
It is the entire ballgame.
And the results of this calculated safety-first approach. I mean, at the DRC finals, they were undeniable. This team proved that their system worked.
They avoided falling entirely, which for a complex, heavy humanoid robot of that generation was a massive engineering triumph.
And when they did run into trouble,
When they did encounter difficulties, the remote operators, using those high-fidelity interfaces in the monitoring systems, they were capable of safely recovering the robot from really difficult, unstable situations, all without needing a total system shutdown or any human going out to help.
just look at the metrics that really matter in a real disaster. The sources say they were the only team in the DRC finals that even attempted all 8 of the designated tasks.
Which shows incredible confidence in the reliability of their system, both the hardware and that human interface.
And their score was high? 14 out of a possible 16 points.
That's strong, but the most telling statistic, the one for disaster readiness, is this. They did not require a single physical human intervention, not one reset during their 2 missions across 2 full days of intense testing.
And we need to really reiterate the significance of that reset. In a real nuclear environment, a reset means sending a person in a full protective suit into the hazardous zone just to physically pick the robot up or reconnect a cable.
So avoiding a reset entirely is, by definition, mission success in a truly remote, dangerous environment. It is the ultimate measure of reliability.
And the fact that the Atlas team Also had the most consistent pair of runs among all the competitors. It's just the clearest proof.
It's the proof that their strategy, combining that robust hardware, the intensive operator training, and that multi-bandwidth communication control system, was the blueprint for operational consistency and survivability in a hazard zone.
It sets an incredibly high standard. It really demonstrates that when lives are on the line, consistency and this kind of fail-safe, redundant design, it has to take priority over just pure speed.
Yeah.
But this was a contest, and there was a huge prize purse. And the team that actually won, they didn't follow that same safety-first strategy.
Indeed. While the Atlas program demonstrated this incredibly robust methodology, the ultimate goal of the $3.5 million contest was to spur development for a robot that could respond rapidly and effectively. It links right back to the operational needs they saw during Fukushima.
And that operational focus led to the winner, Team Keist of Daejeon, South Korea. They took home the $2 million first-place prize.
They did, and they did it with their custom robot, DRC Hubo.
And Hubo's performance was fast.
It was incredibly fast.
Yeah.
DRC Hubo successfully completed all 8 of those diverse disaster response tasks in under 45 minutes at the finals in Pomona. And crucially, DRC Hubo used a significantly different approach from Atlas.
Right, it had the wheels.
It could switch between bipedal walking and movement on wheels that were built into its knees. That allowed it to move so much faster on flat surfaces. This hybrid mobility gave it a distinct speed advantage.
And the DRC Challenge, it demanded these true integrated multi-domain capabilities. It was simulating a genuinely chaotic environment.
Oh, absolutely. The tasks included driving a vehicle to the disaster site,
Then getting out of the car.
then getting out, walking through uneven rubble, climbing an industrial staircase, breaching a door, and manipulating tools like turning a valve.
The complexity has to be in those handoffs, right? Going from one task to the next.
That's where it all falls apart. I mean, building a robot that can drive is relatively easy. Building one that can drive, then stop, safely transition to standing on 2 feet, climb out of the vehicle, then walk over unstable terrain, then visually identify and manipulate a standard industrial valve.
That whole sequence.
That sequence demands such deep integration of perception, mobility, and manipulation. The robot has to successfully execute all of those state changes and transitions without failing.
So this brings us to a really fundamental question, especially if we're holding up the Atlas team's consistency as the ideal measure of reliability. What truly dictates success in these contests? Is it the robot hardware, like the unique speed of DRC Hubo's design? Or is it the intelligence baked into that human-robot interface and the operational strategy, like the varying levels of abstraction the Atlas team championed?
That is the critical conflict that the DRC really exposed to the world. The sources that detail the control systems and the strategy, they suggest that the hardware is the necessary foundation. You have to have it.
Right.
But the software and the operational strategy are the limiting factors.
So Hubo won because its hybrid mobility just let it complete the task sequence faster.
It allowed for greater speed, and its software expertly managed those difficult transitions between the wheeled mode and the bipedal mode.
But wait a minute. If the Atlas team delivered the most consistent, error-free run, if they avoided any physical human intervention and really proved the concept of survivability, doesn't the fact that the faster, more complex, and maybe less consistent DRC Hubo won the big prize suggest that DARPA was optimizing for speed and maybe flashiness over raw survivability?
That's interesting.
Which seems counterintuitive for a machine that's meant to go into a radiation zone.
That is a deeply probing question, and it speaks to this inherent tension you always find in competitive development. DARPA wanted to push the boundaries of capability, and Hubo demonstrated a greater breadth of capability in a shorter amount of time.
But what's the lesson for people in the real world?
The operational lesson for practitioners is crystal clear. The Atlas team's success highlights that in a true high-stakes scenario where communication is degraded and human life is risked by intervention, the control philosophy, that multi-bandwidth communication, is arguably the biggest breakthrough.
The ability to intervene.
It's the ability to reliably manage the robot's vulnerabilities. That's what translates directly to real-world operational viability, no matter who won the contest.
So it's almost like the competition accidentally created 2 distinct crucial legacies. You have the hardware breakthrough of hybrid mobility from Hubo, and then you have this operational and software breakthrough of fail-safe, human-guided control from Atlas.
Precisely. And if we look back at the technical papers in your stack, that concept we talked about, runtime modifiable behavior control, it's not just a theory, it's an engineering necessity.
The robot needs the high-level autonomy to tackle the big tasks.
But that system must have a rapid, reliable mechanism to shift its entire control strategy the instant an error is detected, or a human operator sees a weakness in the autonomous plan. This blend is what defines cutting-edge disaster robotics today.
Okay, so that takes us from the challenge of building a human-shaped machine for a human-engineered environment to the next major frontier,
Maximizing autonomy in completely unengineered chaotic spaces.
which is the core of the Subterranean challenge, or Sub-T.
Right, and the transition from DRC to Sub-T, it represents a massive leap in the level of autonomy required. DARPA moved from focusing on the simulated, sort of familial infrastructure of a power plant to genuinely unknown, hostile, and GPS-denied environments.
Like caves.
Natural caves, underground tunnels, complex urban infrastructure ruins. In these spaces, the critical failure mode shifts. It's not about falling over anymore. It's about getting permanently lost.
And the key innovation that Sub-T demands, and what the sources really highlight, is the need for heterogeneous robot teams with unified perception and autonomy. That's a huge concept.
It is. The central problem of the underground is that it's just inherently varied and brutal on hardware. A wheeled robot can cover ground fast on a paved tunnel floor, but it's totally useless when it hits a sheer vertical shaft or a mountain of rubble.
And a drone can help.
A drone can map the ceiling and bypass obstacles, but its battery life is limited, and it struggles in dusty or wet conditions. So the heterogeneous part means using all these different platforms, flying robots, tracked robots, wheeled robots, even humanoids, all at the same time.
And the unified perception part is the non-negotiable glue that makes that heterogeneity work.
Absolutely. It means that all these different platforms, each with their own unique sensors, lidar, sonar, thermal cameras, gas sniffers, they have to share a single, coherent, and constantly updated view of the environment.
So if one drone spots a gas leak 100 meters down a tunnel,
And a tracked rover detects a human-like heat signature 50 meters in the other direction,
that data has to be instantly reconciled.
into one 3D map. A map for the human operator and, critically, for the other autonomous agents on the team. The entire team has to cooperate seamlessly toward that mission goal of finding and identifying things in the dark.
And we have a perfect case study for this from the source material. It involves Team CSRO Data 61, one of the top contenders at the Sub-T challenge.
Yes, this was at the urban circuit, which was set amidst the ruins of the Satsop Washington nuclear reactor site, a really spooky, dark, partially built power plant.
And this specific anecdote, it just perfectly demonstrates the payoff of this unified perception and teamwork idea.
So picture this. One of the team's robots is operating far beyond the human line of sight, deep inside this damp, dark, abandoned structure, and it catches a whiff of carbon dioxide. The CO2 sensor, a simple but critical input, it registers a high reading.
And that tiny but critical piece of data gets relayed back immediately through whatever patchy communication link they have.
Mesh, networks, repeaters, maybe a fiber optic line being spooled out behind the robot.
It gets back to the human operator, Fletcher Talbot, who's hundreds of feet away, safe in a command bunker.
Right. And Talbot, who's the human mission arbiter, he registers that gas sensing, along with the precise coordinates that the robot is providing from its own mapping system, its SLAM system.
And he has to interpret that. CO2 could mean a blocked passage, a chemical hazard,
Or, critically, the presence of a survivor,
Yeah.
someone breathing. He feeds those coordinates into the mission control computer.
And this is where the power of the integrated system is realized. The moment those validated coordinates are registered, a point appears on the video scoreboard. It marks a successful detection and localization of a critical artifact.
And the whole team applauds.
Oh.
But that applause isn't just for a point in a game.
No.
It's for this complex chain of trust and data fusion. A simple sensor on one machine detected a complex environmental factor. That machine localized itself in a GPS-denied world. It communicated that data across a harsh environment back to a human. And the human immediately validated the finding and translated it into cohesive mission intelligence that the whole team could see and use.
So let's dive into that technical challenge of unified perception a bit more. How does the system handle, say, beta conflict between these different sensors? A drone might use Lidar to make a precise 3D point cloud of a cavern, but a thermal camera on a rover detects a heat signature that's maybe fuzzy or poorly localized. How do they resolve that into a single map the human can trust?
That is where these advanced sensor fusion algorithms come into play. They're often rooted in things like Bayesian filtering or other statistical methods. They don't just layer the data on top of each other, they assign confidence weights to it.
So LiDAR is good for geometry.
Exactly. The LiDAR data might have a high weight for geometry, where the walls are, while the thermal data has a high weight for object identification. Is that a warm body? The fusion system has to continuously estimate the position of every identified feature based on all the observations from all the robots. And it has to do it while managing the uncertainty of each sensor type.
So it takes the chaos of the underground and translates it into a single, understandable, high-confidence picture for the person in charge.
That is the definition of operational autonomy supported by human intervention. And this commitment to solving the hardest problems in the toughest environments, that's what leads to the long-term payoff DARPA is really aiming for. It goes way beyond the prize money.
The sources explicitly note that the participants gain this invaluable experience and confidence from, and I'm quoting here, having broken a robot or two in this challenging environment.
It sounds funny, but it's a testament to the brutal, real-world nature of this kind of R&D. That iterative process of failure, debugging, and survival in a stressful, destructive environment, that's what's anticipated to lead directly to new companies, new specialized labs, and ultimately new commercial and public safety solutions.
It's the classic DARPA model, proven over decades. You set an extreme goal, you offer a massive reward, you enforce a strict deadline, and the technological leaps that result just cascade down into the civilian sector.
You can think of it another way. These challenges function as a sort of hyper-efficient, high-stakes market simulator for innovation. They compel engineers to not just solve the problem theoretically, but to solve it robustly, cheaply, and quickly enough to win.
And the skills they hone there, advanced sensor fusion, robust control systems, they're immediately transferable.
To industrial inspection, to mining, and of course to urban search and rescue.
Okay, this whole technological push relies on some invisible but absolutely core technical foundations. We've touched on it a few times, but I think we need to give it the deep dive it deserves.
Right? We have to analyze the underlying technical requirements that allow these machines to even function remotely. And that brings us back to the unsung hero of all of this. Simultaneous Localization and Mapping, SLAM.
So for anyone listening, why is SLAM an essential skill? Why can't these robots just use GPS, especially in a challenge like Sub-T?
SLAM is essential because the moment you send a robot into a collapsed building, a mine shaft, or a cave, GPS is gone.
Yeah.
The signals are immediately blocked or degraded. You are in a GPS-denied environment.
So the robot has to figure out where it is.
And what the surroundings look like.
At the same time.
Simultaneously, using only its onboard sensors, Lidar, cameras, wheel encoders. It's the fundamental problem of, I am lost, I have no map, and I have to solve both problems at once.
That seems like an almost insurmountable problem for a computer to be running in real time. How do you even model that mathematically so a robot's onboard processor can handle it?
The most intuitive and state-of-the-art way of formulating SLAM is using a graph-based structure. Think of this graph as the robot's evolving understanding of its world.
Okay.
The nodes in this graph correspond to the poses of the robot, its specific position and orientation at different moments in time as it moves.
So if a Sub-T rover stops every few feet to take a LiDAR scan, each one of those stops becomes a new node on this graph, marking where it thinks it was at that time.
Precisely. Now, the connections between those nodes, those are the critical part. They're called edges. These edges represent the constraints between the poses. They're the measurements that link all the nodes together.
And where do those measurements come from?
They come from two main sources. First, internal movement actions, like wheel odometry, which tells the system how far it thinks it has traveled since the last node. And second, observations of the environment. When the robot sees a recognizable feature, like a corner or a unique rock formation, from two different poses.
So if the robot moves forward and then uses its LiDAR to confirm that the corner it saw before is now exactly where it should be based on its movement, that observation validates the whole model.
And that confirmation is called a loop closure. It's incredibly powerful. If a robot travels a complex path and then returns to an area it mapped before and successfully recognizes those features, that generates an extremely strong constraint. So the core objective of SLAM is to compute the spatial configuration of all these nodes, all the robot poses. That is the most consistent with all of the measurements modeled by the edges.
And any inconsistency is an error that has to be minimized.
Exactly. It's a massive optimization problem, especially when you think about a robot mapping hundreds of meters of tunnels and caves in the Sub-D challenge.
So how is it solved?
The state-of-the-art solution relies on complex least squares error minimization techniques. The system finds the configuration of the entire map that minimizes the total error in all the accumulated measurements. And this optimization has to happen continuously and efficiently in real time while the robot is moving.
What's so fascinating to me is that while SLAM is foundational to these cutting-edge DARPA challenges, the sources also remind us this is not a new field.
Not at all. SLAM as a concept has been around for decades. Research really spiked in the late 90s and 2000s. The sources note that by around 2006-2010, efficient approaches for solving this were already well understood and established parts of robotics theory.
Which means the challenges DARPA is solving now aren't theoretical concepts in SLAM, but rather the intensely practical problems of deploying SLAM in these hostile real-world conditions.
Precisely. The general mathematical method is established, but the sources point out that so many practical issues remain, especially when you move outdoors or into these chaotic industrial environments.
And what are those issues?
They typically fall into three critical areas that can make or break a mission: computation speed, for real-time operation; feature representation, which is how the robot accurately identifies and remembers unique parts of the world; and the massive headache of data association, correctly matching what it sees now to features it's already seen before.
When you have a machine like Atlas performing these delicate manipulations based on its self-localization, or a sub-T robot rushing through a dark, dusty tunnel where features are sparse, those practical issues are the difference between success and mission failure.
And that's how we connect the core technical foundation of SLAM back to the operational success of the DRC teams. We connect it through that concept of runtime modifiable behavior control.
So SLAM provides the precise, localized map of the world, but the control system dictates the movement within that map. And in a rescue scenario, that runtime modifiability is crucial.
It's the safety redundancy. If the robot is executing a high-level autonomous command, say, walk to the valve, and the onboard SLAM system suddenly detects a big discrepancy, or the air monitoring system flags an impending instability, the control strategy has to shift instantly.
The system architecture has to be built to allow that rapid transition from the pre-programmed plan to immediate low-level human intervention.
And that rapid transition is the difference between an autonomous robot that can be safely guided through uncertainty and one that is simply a liability in a crisis. The human operator is fundamentally there to manage the exceptions, the moments where the computation fails, the features are confusing, or stability is compromised, and the system needs to revert immediately to direct control.
It's the perfect blend of established theoretical robotics, like SLAM, meeting the bleeding edge of engineering implementation building robust fail-safe control interfaces.
It's where human ingenuity creates the mechanism for the machine's survival.
We've spent a lot of necessary time focused on these DARPA challenges, as they really were the technical centerpiece of our source material. But, as we know, the sources you provided cover, well, a vast and comprehensive ground.
They do. It demonstrates your pursuit of comprehensive awareness across multiple, seemingly unrelated fields.
That's the nature of a robust information stack, right? It pulls in critical data from these disparate areas, forcing us to synthesize knowledge from robotics to local policy to global affairs.
The value is in acknowledging and detailing the sheer breadth of information that you're processing.
So we need to bridge this narrative. If the robotics segment was all about designing robust mechanisms for risk mitigation in physical environments, then this next segment is about how governments and planners design risk mitigation strategies for long-term resource management in volatile geopolitical situations.
That is exactly the right lens. We're shifting from the microseconds of runtime control to the multi-year timelines of public policy and finance. Let's start with the local governance and resource planning data you flagged. This is from Florida, specifically about Charlotte County water management.
Right. The sources outline a very clear long-range planning problem. Based on population growth, Charlotte County is projected to need additional water supply by the year 2029.
And that specific date, 2029, that's the key point for the resource planners. Right now, the county uses about 12.57 million gallons per day.
Which is comfortably below their current capacity of 16.1 million.
It is. But it's the anticipated projected demand growth that's driving the concern. That demand is expected to exceed the current capacity by 2029.
A classic example of a predictable yet large-scale failure point. If they wait until 2029 to react, they're already in a resource deficit. And this long-range planning is immediately tied to massive infrastructure costs, specifically the rebuild of the Peace River facility.
And that facility has logged over 30 years of service, so a major overhaul is just unavoidable. The sources confirm this project is pegged at $12.8 million.
And what's critical here is how that funding is being managed.
It is because this facility serves multiple regions. It required an amendment to the master water supply contract involving Charlotte, Sarasota, DeSoto, and Manatee counties to settle on a transparent and fair sharing formula for that cost.
The complexity of multi-county financial negotiations over a shared resource is often overlooked. It's not just about spending the money, it's about four regional governments agreeing on a burden-sharing mechanism for a resource that, if it's mismanaged, could impact them all.
It mirrors the complexity of getting a heterogeneous team of robots to agree on a single coordinated action. And that infrastructure spending has to be coordinated years in advance.
Because failure to mitigate that projected water shortage in 2029 is a slow-motion disaster.
Distinct from a sudden nuclear crisis, but equally devastating for the population affected. The solution requires a similarly rigorous, fail-safe approach to planning and funding.
Okay, moving from local to global, we also had data on high-level international affairs, specifically a G7 meeting held in Germany.
Yes, and this piece of the source material provided a very clear, united signal from the world's leading industrialized democracies. This was about the conflict between Russia and Ukraine.
What was the signal?
The leaders agreed that sanctions against Russia would remain explicitly and clearly linked to Russia's full implementation of the Minsk peace accord for Ukraine.
And why is that emphasis on the full implementation so critical?
Linking sanctions removal to the full implementation of Minsk is the diplomatic mechanism. It establishes a clear, measurable condition for de-escalation. The Minsk Accords established a ceasefire and a roadmap for resolution. By insisting on full implementation, the G7 signaled that partial or superficial compliance would not be enough to lift those significant economic pressures.
And the source material mentioned that the discussion was only about whether to keep the sanctions or strengthen them.
At the time, yes, given the lack of full commitment to the accord. That unified front matters hugely, because economic sanctions only work if the international coalition imposing them holds together without major cracks.
It solidified that commitment.
Exactly. And finally, there was a very complex snippet of political theory regarding high-level strategy in the Middle East, specifically policy options for Iraq.
Right. The material detailed a policy debate centering on two opposing approaches: centralization versus devolution, or what was called the separation strategy.
Yes, the policy critique focused on the centralized, Baghdad-focused approach. This was viewed by the sources as fundamentally failing to address the underlying socio-political challenges. It was actually exacerbating sectarian tensions, increasing the marginalization of minority groups, and leading to a complete collapse of faith in national institutions.
So the argument was that centralizing power, while maybe intended to promote unity, actually created more failure points by ignoring all the regional and sectarian complexities.
Precisely. The result was a system that was brittle and prone to collapse, much like a complex robotic system without adequate error monitoring. The proposed alternative was devolution, the separation strategy.
And what does that devolution strategy actually entail?
It suggests giving as much local political and security control as possible to different sectarian groups and regions. The objective is to actively encourage groups to create space between those populations.
So the core idea is that forcing incompatible groups together just intensifies conflict.
Exactly. By encouraging separation and local control, the hope is that hatreds and tensions could cool, allowing a more moderating, rational dynamic to eventually replace the brutalizing conflicts. It's a strategy for long-term risk mitigation by distributing power and diffusing those centralized points of failure.
It just demonstrates the incredible diversity of complex problems we're constantly trying to solve, whether it's figuring out how to cool sectarian tensions, calculating a cost-sharing formula for a water plant, or ensuring a humanoid robot doesn't trip over rubble in a radioactive zone.
And the methods used to tackle these immense challenges, whether they're in robotics or policy, often converge on similar high-level strategic principles. You identify the biggest, most likely point of failure, and you implement a robust mechanism, whether it's a runtime modifiable control system or a devolution of political power, to control or mitigate that risk long before it becomes catastrophic.
We have certainly covered a lot of ground today. We've moved from these high-stakes, really dramatic competitions sponsored by DARPA all the way to the core algorithms and engineering that make autonomy possible, and then connected those concepts to the broader policy concerns present in your information stack.
But the key narrative thread, I think, remains centered on that massive technological push from the DARPA Robotics Challenge and the Subterranean Challenge. These events successfully transformed the theoretical goal of disaster response into concrete, measurable engineering benchmarks.
And they were directly motivated by the operational failures we saw in crises like Fukushima.
Absolutely. We saw how the humanoid hurdle, the DRC, was overcome not just by advanced hardware like Atlas or DRC Hubo, but by developing a sophisticated safety-first strategy.
Which relied on that rigorous pre-mission practice, explicit error monitoring, and, most importantly, those highly refined human-robot interfaces.
The ones that allow the operator to shift rapidly and reliably between a high-level autonomous plan and low-level, moment-to-moment manual intervention. That robust, fail-safe transition capability is the operational lesson for any complex system.
And all of that success is underpinned entirely by the invisible mathematical foundation of mobile robotics, SLAM, Simultaneous Localization and Mapping.
Right. We detailed how SLAM lets robots create a usable map from scratch in these GPS-denied environments by formulating the problem as a graph, where robot poses are nodes and sensor measurements are edges, and then solving it efficiently. This technology is foundational for those heterogeneous teams navigating the chaotic tunnels and caves of the Sub-T challenge.
The long-term non-monetary benefit of these DARPA challenges is so clear. It's about fostering the confidence, the technical connections, and the intense development cycles among engineers that lead directly to the next generation of specialized labs and companies.
Companies that are ready to address genuine infrastructure and disaster crises using these autonomous machines.
So the core takeaway for you, the listener, is that success in navigating these complex, high-stakes fields, whether it's disaster robotics or resource planning for 2029, it always hinges on one factor.
Continually monitoring for potential failure points and implementing redundant mechanisms that allow for controlled transitions between high-level autonomous execution and rapid, necessary low-level intervention.
And here is a final provocative thought for you to take away, one that builds on the fundamental breakthrough of that Sub-T challenge. The ability of those subterranean robots to safely navigate, sense, and map an unknown tunnel relies on highly sophisticated, real-time, simultaneous localization and mapping.
Which raises an important question.
It does. If autonomous robots are constantly creating and updating these high-fidelity, centimeter-accurate maps of the unknown, of our critical infrastructure, our disaster zones, and eventually our daily public and private spaces, what are the profound long-term implications for human infrastructure, oversight, and security when that detailed world mapping capability inevitably becomes ubiquitous, cheap, and moves out of specialized DARPA labs and into mass-market commercial technology? What happens when everyone has a real-time, high-fidelity map of everything? Something to think about until the next deep dive.